Back on the Good Morning Artesia radio show, it's County Commission Hour, and County Commissioner Fred Beard is with us, and Jerry Fanning is here with us as well. And let's get into yesterday's County Commission meeting. Where would you like to begin, Fred?
The place I'd like to begin, and I voted for it yesterday, and I would not like anybody to take that the wrong way. Request to set a public hearing date to consider adoption of a 020-101 Eddy County Lodgers Tax Ordinance.
Okay.
That's to increase the lodgers tax or to expand it. Now I voted for some public outreach. I voted for this hearing. And let me think how I'm going to put this without stepping in it. If enough people that are going to be affected by this tax increase show up at this hearing and say, I very much want you to raise my taxes, I will consider it. I think I'm probably going to be a no vote.
I understand that clearly. You were okay with the process of having a conversation moving forward,
yes.
But at this point you're leaning...
I'm leaning
against increasing the amount of money that is spent by the lodgers tax folks.
I said once upon a time that I ran on no new taxes and something about roads, and you accused me for running on the road, so I'm going to be careful how I put that. But yes, if it's a tax, I'm not going to vote for it.
Okay. So they're asking for more money for more outreach and things like that.
Yes. So
okay.
If and it's the lodgers tax, it goes in the lodgers tax fund. Mm-hmm. And I think the first 30 days a lodger is here in an RV park, it's got to be in the county that they are taxed. And after 30 days, they do not. And they want to set it up unless you change a permanent address or what have you, you continue to pay that lodgers tax past 30 days. And to me, that's a tax increase. So,
okay.
And that's where I'm at on that.
All right. Understand.
There were
when is the hearing? Has the hearing been set?
Yes, it was. I did not write the date down.
They're shooting for the first commission meeting in August.
Okay.
August.
And
okay.
it will be during a regular commission meeting.
Okay.
And the hearing will be held at that time, and then if the commission so decides to act on it at that time as a vote, they can do that. Yeah.
Well, right now the second Tuesday in August is the 3rd.
The 3rd. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was around the 2nd. Yes.
Yeah. So that's where it's tentatively set, but it has to be posted and it'll be on the online agendas and all that kind of stuff.
And one other thing I'll interject is just kind of to pull out a little more what the commissioner said is that not only does this extend the tax, it would be, instead of being the 5%, it would be a 2.5% after that time of that total cost of there. And also what the bill does was a bill that was passed in Santa Fe. It's totally optional if a municipality or anyone wants to adopt it. But the county can vote on what the amount is, up to 5%. The recommendation right now is the 2.5%. It extends it after that 30-day period. And then also what that does is the money before the 30 days is very prescriptive by the act.
The lodgers
you can
tax.
only spend it on certain things as far as travel, tourism, things like that. After this 30 days, when the 2.5%, if adopted, kicks in, it will give the ability for the county to use that for other purposes as designated through an adopted ordinance, which means if they had the 2.5%, they could spend it on law enforcement. They could spend it on emergency services. They can spend it on various things as far as infrastructure goes. It won't be prescriptive as that first 30 days is.
Right.
So
okay.
just to make clear, there's other things there in extending that it does change if adopted.
And it doesn't affect hotel lodging. It does. It does.
If it's adopted, if it's outside the city limits as far as the county goes. Carlsbad has already adopted the new lodgers tax They adopted that last year within their city limits for their hotels.
So
as an
the first
extension.
30 day, it's an extension beyond somebody that's staying 30 days.
Correct.
Or longer in a hotel room or in an RV park.
Correct.
Okay.
And the idea behind that bill, which was passed in 2020, the idea behind that bill is that there were a lot of folks that were working in this area that were taking advantage of services offered by the cities and counties and not actually paying for any of that through what they were. I mean, that was the idea.
That was
not
the
saying
idea.
that they weren't. They're spending money. Don't get me wrong. They are.
Right,
through
right.
gross receipts and other things. But that was the idea behind pushing this piece of legislation, is so those people would also pay a part of that, those services they were doing. I mean, I'm just telling you what was actually brought forward is in support of the legislation in Santa Fe.
Because anything that's collected in the first 30 days is
prescriptive.
Right. It has to be for very specific purposes. So now, I guess they figured out a way that if you're going to stay in a hotel or an RV park more than 30 days, well, we'll do this little tax over here. We'll run it through the lodger's tax. So the RV park owners and the hotel owners are already collecting the tax now, so they continue to be the tax collector on that additional revenue. And your position, Fred, is that it's a new tax, and that
it's still a tax. Any way you paint it, it's still more tax. Somebody's got to do the paperwork. Somebody's got to collect it. It puts a burden on the people that do collect it, because it's going to be, I think the rates change from
5 to 2.
From 5 to 2, so it's more paperwork, and it's like I say, if there's a lot of you folks out there that really want this tax, you need to show up at the hearing and make yourselves heard. So
if you really want this tax.
If you really want this tax.
I hear you, Fred. I think I hear you. So tentatively right now it's set for the first, during just the regular county commission meeting, the first Tuesday in August, which is August 3rd. So, and if that changes,
that's a tentative date. We have not.
If that changes or whatever, you'll put the word out on that. Let folks know. Well, that's an interesting deal. And you said the city of Carlsbad has already adopted it.
Yes.
I don't know if Artesia has done that or not.
No, Artesia has not.
Has not. Okay. So very interesting. All right. Do you have another item there, Fred?
Not particularly. A lot of it was reports. As he's referred to, Miss Roberta Smith is our budget, what's her title actually?
Finance director.
Finance director, who's done a wonderful job. I can remember when the budget was not so wonderful for the county. I think she has really straightened it out. She's requested a special meeting because of dates involved, which we're going to do for her to the dates cross up with the end of the fiscal year and what's got to be done on what the taxes that are collected from the treasurer. So we're going to do that. Everything's balancing, everything's working, everything's accounted for. It's all public information. I'm assuming on the website, it's all out there. So if anybody's interested in that, they can certainly go have a look at it. But
okay,
that's being run very well. The rest of it is pretty perfunctory stuff. We talked a lot about the roads and the flooding, and like I say, we've already kind of covered all that. So
yeah, Jerry, were there some things from the meeting that you wanted to make a note on and discuss?
Been a busy month. Legislatively, we have a lot of interim committee meetings that happen during the year. For folks that are listening who don't know what that means, is that's where the sausage starts getting made, is during these interim meetings. And so there's a lot of reporting on what the budget looks like for the year for New Mexico, potential prospects for expenditures coming up in the January session. We have a 30-day budget session this year, of course. A lot of reporting from the different agencies. We had a meeting last week in Ruidoso of the Legislative Finance Committee, Interim Committee. Many reports given there. In particular, the one that was lead off was the oil and gas, status of oil and gas industry and what was brought into the state and how that's looking. I can tell you that we're looking good. New Mexico can be thankful. I showed the commissioners yesterday the report that came out of LSC, and I wanted to refer to it not as the state of New Mexico report, but the state of Southeast New Mexico report,
right,
because that report is all about oil and gas revenues and the projections, what they're looking at for the next 2 to 3 years, what it's generating, and how the pandemic actually affected or didn't affect that industry. And the numbers showed that it really didn't affect it that much.
Mm-hmm.
We were the one industry that kept working with our mask on. And
yeah, I saw that. Yes,
yes, and kept moving money into the coffers of New Mexico. Thankfully,
right,
they're always very appreciative of our money. It was interesting to see the projections and what they're looking at as far as what they think the price of oil is going to be and what those averages look like, and everything was up from what their projections were. We actually, in the commission meeting, and I want to put a few kudos out here, not just because I work for the county, but because the smart people that work for the county do a great job of handling our budget, and not as historically the state of New Mexico has over-predicted the price of oil and overspent that budget based on those predictions. We as a county have not done that. We've been very conservative. I think we've left. Right now, I think we're projecting at $35 a barrel oil, which everybody knows it's a little above that right now. Praise the Lord. And so our budget looks good. The state, actually, I was very surprised in that they've brought some of their projections down. They think the average price, I think somewhere for 2021, they're looking at like $49.50 a barrel, which we know today
what
WTIs are really around 75.
Yeah.
Which that's fine. That's good.
Better to be that way than to,
that's right,
project it at 69 and have it be at 54, and then you're going, well, where's the money going to come from?
One of the things that was talked about is the moratorium on leasing, and did that have an effect on the state? And actually, it hasn't had an effect. We have seen rig count numbers drop. I think that's an effect we may see later on. One of the things that was brought up at the commission meeting yesterday, which is a very good point, is that there were a lot of wells that were drilled and uncompleted out there. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to see those completed, which kind of makes up the difference. But as we all know, if we look at that, because rig counts dropped, we're completing these uncompleted wells that were drilled prior to that. That will have an effect down the road. And the other thing we have to think about is Iran is becoming a factor in the global market. And what does that really look like? No one knows.
Right.
No one knows how that's going to affect the market.
What kind of oil is Iranian oil versus ours, and what markets are we going to be competing against them?
Great point, Gene. Everybody thinks oil's the same.
It's not.
It's all the same, and it's all a big lake underground, 3,000 or 4,000 feet, and they just go down there and stick a straw in it and suck it out. And that's the uninformed folks that don't live in our part of the world. That's kind of the way they look at it, and it's not the way it is. There are different grades for different purposes and things, but anyway, the good news is that New Mexico, thankfully for oil and gas and what we've done, is keeping the state running, keeping the schools running, keeping a lot of things running. One of the points about the moratorium I go back to is that I laugh because they were saying, well, how is this going to affect permitting for drilling of new wells? And the rationale was, well, 89% of the federal lands and leases in New Mexico are already leased up. That's all good. And 89% of that is held by production. That's all good. But the part that they left out, which we think in the oil and gas business is very critical, is what about drilling permits? What about right-of-ways, saltwater disposal wells? All of these things that make the money for the oil industry, and how are they being stifled in some way, form, or fashion? And we know that there's a lot of that going on at the Washington level that we're not hearing about. So that's the unknown things I think we have to fear. The other thing we have to fear, which was brought out by a really good friend of mine, one of the state senators, is he told me in a sidebar, he said, the state of New Mexico's flush in money. Thankfully for the pandemic money and for oil and gas, we're flush.
Right.
We have a lot of money, and that's a dangerous situation as we go into a budget session. For those of us that's hair has gotten a little lighter and a little thinner on top and have been around this thing a couple of times.
Yeah.
this state senator I was talking to, and I won't bring his name out, but he's very seasoned. He understands that, and he knows what will happen because we'll get into the budget session, and hopefully we don't see this happen, but it always does, is we see a lot of programs implemented that have ongoing operational costs and expenses, and the oil and gas business changes, and so that money has a potential to not be there in 3 or 4 years when they need something to keep that particular project going.
Well, maybe the cooler heads will say, look, you got your pot, go get the money from them. You know, and we don't even know what the impact of that is because as we've talked about before with the sheriff, there was no local option in that. You know, Eddy County, City of Artesia, City of Carlsbad, you cannot prohibit the sales of marijuana when that comes around sometime next year. So that's going to be an interesting thing to see how that evolves. But maybe that could be some of that. I think that's what the proponents are saying, is that's where some of that revenue is going to come from, that's going to stabilize some of that.
And I keep hearing that, Gene. I keep hearing that the proponents are looking forward to that. The thing that I look at in trying to be in a neutral point, as calling as a a bipartisan stand.
Right.
I have to be a guy that looks at the numbers, and those numbers by the Legislative Finance Committee themselves. These are not numbers that anyone's come out from the left or right. It's the Legislative Finance Committee.
Right.
Their responsibility is to oversee taxes and income expenditures from the state. You know, their projection now says in 4 years, this is 4 years from now, is around $19 million a year.
Right.
It confuses me because a lot of the folks who supported that and who actually moved forward with that commitment to see the legalization, including the governor herself, were touting numbers somewhere in the 100 million.
That's right.
To folks who are in the oil and gas industry down here, 100 million is not that much money.
Right.
But it's a lot of money to other folks. But it's not 100 million. In 4 years, it might be 19, and it might be less, but I have not heard anything or anyone say in any of these projections that it would be more.
It'll be more in those other categories.
So I don't think there's any silver lining out there.
So Fred, in 4 years, they'll have enough money from the marijuana industry to finish off the Brinewell project.
There you go.
And in 4 years, they might be able to do that.
That's putting it in perspective as far as the 17 million we just kicked in.
That's right. So it is kind of interesting where their thinking is. And the governor has said that she supports the oil and gas industry. She's said it down here that she supports the oil and gas industry. The only thing that I fear is that if they are flush in money, and if it looks like the oil and gas industry has done okay through the pandemic and is back at levels that it was prior to the pandemic, will that encourage people on the left and in the environmental sector to keep pushing some of these crazy taxes and regulations on the oil and gas industry? In other words, might they look back and say, well, look, we did this and they're still doing great, so now let's do this? And I guess that's part of the stuff that you've got to kind of keep an eye on as we get closer to these sessions.
That's always been the mindset as long as I've been in it. And at the same time, one of the things that I go back to is during the session, we heard reports from the Oil Conservation Division on their new regulations. I think something that was very interesting that was brought forward was the fact that 60% of the production in New Mexico comes from stripper wells. For those who may not know, these are low volume wells, produce less than 20 barrels a day, I think, something like that. And that question was posed to the director of OCD if they took that in consideration in imposing the new methane rules, how that would impact that 60% out there. And the only answer, and this was by Representative Townsend asked this question, the answer that Representative Townsend got, and I may not have it verbatim, was that it was a public process, it was very well vetted, and everyone had the opportunity to give us that information. Never did answer it. But I'm going to tell you that after the meeting, I do know that those numbers came back, but what she had said in the meeting was she thought, maybe 400 or 500 wells. Well, it was more like 30,000 wells. And so the numbers are there when you look at the total amount of production in New Mexico take 60% away, and even with my artesian math, sometimes I can figure out those kind of numbers, but that's a huge number.
Yeah.
And even if 10% of those wells were taken offline, that's still a big number.
And
I think it's probably more than the 19 million from marijuana.
From the marijuana. And so the thinking, they may just had wrong numbers in calculating their opinions, even though they said everybody had an opportunity to put the numbers in. So I guess the concern on the stripper wells on the methane rules is that it becomes cost prohibitive to do all the things necessary to the well to capture the methane if all it's doing is producing 20 barrels a day. So you don't spend the methane money, you just shut the well down, and now you've taken 60% of our oil production offline.
And the other part of that is a lot of these small operators will not be able to properly plug and abandon those wells.
Okay.
So that becomes an additional financial burden on the state of New Mexico when those folks actually, some of them will probably
abandon them,
walk away from those and abandon them because financially they won't be able to do that, what it takes. That becomes a burden on the state of New Mexico. That money to close and plug those wells are somewhere around $30,000 to $40,000 a well to plug and abandon a well. Now, that was a number they gave. That's not my number. That was a number they quoted. And so that, when you take that many wells, 30,000 times 50 or 60,000 a piece, it's still a lot more money than we can overcome with the marijuana.
And remember, the first 4 years of marijuana money we're in the red. Earmarked for the brine well. So
we're in the red.
So we don't have any money after 4 years. Right. So get smoking, folks. No, I'm just kidding. I am not advocating that at all.
I addressed that with a question, and I've mentioned this on the air and other places. I still haven't got an answer. If this marijuana is going to generate so much money, revenue, if it's so wonderful and everybody's going to love it, there's no problems. There's 14, 15 other states that have done this. Where is the governor? Where is the Speaker of the House to stand up of any of those states and say, this has been a resounding success. It's done everything we wanted it to do and more. It's caused no problems, and everybody ought to do this.
Yeah.
Where is that state and that representative?
Hear those. That's an unfortunate thing.
Well, everything you do here is just the opposite. So.
Well, everything that you do has a cost, and I don't know that we've been told the true cost of what's going to happen to society from this, and I don't know that we've been truly told. I mean, there's people that know, but I don't know that the vast majority of the public's been told, look, we're going to do this, but this is what the true costs are going to be for the law enforcement and for the rehab and for the other health-related issues and employment issues associated with it. I do need to break for the news. Can you guys stick around for just a few more minutes?
Yes, I've got one more thing.
We've got on the other side. So we have Jerry Fanning here, County Commissioner Fred Beard. This is